Hey everybody, Spacewizard here. This week a ton of new Whispers of the Old God cards got revealed, so for this week's video, I'm going to be reviewing them and getting a little in-depth on the ones that I think have the most potential for seeing competitive play. Starting off with the most recently revealed cards, we've got Infested Tauren, a 2/3 for 4 with Taunt, and a death rattle that summons a 2/2 slime. I think most people will look at this card and say that it has absolutely no potential, and given the current state of the game, I can't really blame them for doing so. It trades very poorly with some of the bigger 4-drops, and it's just barely better than Harvest Golem in terms of mana efficiency. But let's imagine for a moment a world where Piloted Shredder does not exist, and the only other viable 4-mana minions that you can play on curve are Sen'jin Shieldmaster and Chillwind Yeti. That's what Standard looks like right now. Out of these three cards, I actually kind of lean towards the Infested Tauren in an aggro deck. With Naxxramas cycling out, this gives you some stickiness to work with, and at the same time, because it has Taunt, it can protect your weaker minions. Sen'jin is right out because it's too vulnerable to trades and removal to be played in aggro, and while Chillwind's stat line is very strong, it doesn't have the stickiness that Piloted Shredder had that justified its 4-mana cost in an aggro deck. Furthermore, it's difficult to justify destroying low-health minions with a Chillwind Yeti, whereas the Infested Tauren excels at trading with tiny stuff. Just looking at the cards that a deck like Zoo, for example, has access to right now, in Standard, for 4 mana, I think Infested Tauren is a very strong contender for the best card you can pick if you're dead set on having something that you can play on curve for 4 mana. Herald Volazj is a Priest Legendary 5/5 for 6 with a battlecry that summons a 1/1 copy of each of your other minions. So for example, if you had, say, Ragnaros on your board and you played Herald, you'd get a copy of a 1/1 Ragnaros with the same abilities as the original Ragnaros. There's a lot of potential for this card, and I think people might not be giving it enough credit for how good it is. Pretty much any death rattle, taunt, random ability, or even a minion that you've buffed with a spell like Power Word Shield makes Herald arguably the best 6-drop you can play in a priest deck. Let's say you have a Loot Hoarder on the board. Herald would effectively become a 5/5 that summons a 1/1 and draws you a card. Every deck would play that if they could, and that's just assuming you only have 1 minion on the board. If you have 2 or more minions, Herald just becomes a mini Dr. Boom. You don't need some crazy big minion like Ragnaros to make this card good. Now, admittedly, this card's major weakness is that it does require there to be a minion on the board for it to be good. You can't just play it by itself on curve, which could very easily make it not viable. But in any deck that's going to lose anyways if it has an empty board on turn 6, I think there's no reason not to include Herald in it. And in a control deck that has lots of good targets for Herald's effect, I see no reason not to play Herald just for the juicy combos. Hogger, Doom of Elwynn, is a legendary 6/6 for 7 that summons a 2/2 null with Taunt whenever it takes damage. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't play this in Patron Warrior because your Whirlwind effects would damage the nulls unnecessarily, and outside of a deck that it has synergy with, this card just seems kind of slow. It does nothing when it comes out, and your opponent isn't forced to trade with it, so best case scenario, you're either hitting face or trading and getting a 2/2 with Taunt every turn. That isn't much better than Obsidian Destroyer, and nobody plays that card. So I just don't see why anyone would play Super Hogger unless there is literally no other 7-drop you can play. Forbidden Flame is a 0-mana mage spell that spends all of your mana and deals that much damage to a minion, so on curve nobody is going to be playing this card. Dealing 1 damage for every 1 mana you spend is very inefficient, and you have better removal options at every cost. And since this card can't hit face, there's not really any reason to play it when every other mage removal spell can hit face. Forbidden Healing is a 0-mana paladin spell that spends all of your mana and restores health equal to twice that amount. I like this card a lot for one reason and one reason only. This much healing makes Fatigue Paladin actually viable. You spend 10 mana and you restore 20 health to your hero, and you can do this twice per game. With just 2 cards, your effective life total has been raised to 70, and on top of that, it can be played at any other mana cost if you're in a jam and you need more health to stabilize. Strictly better than Holy Light because of the potential for shutting down aggro in the late game, and it auto-wins you the game if you get into fatigue. This card is crazy good. Forbidden Shaping is a 0-mana priest spell that spends all of your mana and summons a random minion that costs that much. So this is probably my favorite card out of the whole set, and a strong contender for best card reveal in the set so far. I think right now, looking at the cards that have been revealed, there's no reason not to play this in every priest deck for one simple reason. This card is simultaneously every minion in the game all the time. To explain what I mean, imagine you're playing against an aggro deck. You desperately, more than anything, need to curve out so that you can slow the aggro deck down until you draw enough AoE or health restoration to stabilize. What this card does is guarantee that no matter what, you're going to curve out if you have it in your hand. It's important to realize that there's no guarantee that the minion you get is going to be good, but even so, cards like Unstable Portal that work the exact same way still get played. Consider the following. Do you need to play a 1-mana minion to trade with a Leper Gnome? Forbidden Shaping does that. Do you need to play a 3-mana minion because the Priest Hero power sucks and Northshire Cleric on turn 3 is going to lose you the game? Forbidden Shaping does that. Do you need to play a 5-mana minion because it's 5 turns into the game and you still haven't drawn one of your 4 different 5-drops you run because this game hates you? Forbidden Shaping does that. Has there ever been a time where you had some mana left over and you wish you could play an extra minion instead of hero powering? You get the idea. So this card is obviously good in the aggro matchup. But what about the control matchup? Well, that's the beauty of Forbidden Shaping. It's every minion in the game. If you wait until turn 8 to play it, it's an 8/8 or better, and now your opponent suddenly has to use one of his removal spells to kill it, and you still have all of your other big minions ready to go, because Forbidden Shaping doesn't have to be an 8/8. There's no matchup where this card is bad per se. It isn't going to give you an exceptional minion, and sometimes it's going to give you a bad minion, but a bad minion is better than no minion. Giant Sandworm is an 8/8 hunter minion for 8 that can attack again whenever it kills a minion. So theoretically, what you do with this card is trade, and you use its 8 health to trade again, and you end up clearing your opponent's board, and then you probably hit them in the face for 8. This card is too slow. Hunter doesn't need an 8-mana 2-turn board clear. You wouldn't play an 8/8 with Wind Fury, and that's essentially what this card is. There's some potential here for comboing it with Tundra Rhino and Bestial Wrath, but I still contest that it's just too slow for that, and those cards suck when played on their own anyways. 2 bad cards does not a good card make. Ancient Shieldbearer is a 6/6 warrior minion for 7 with a battle cry that gives you 10 armor if your Cthulhu has at least 10 attack. This works regardless of whether or not your Cthulhu is on the board or not, it can be in your hand, your deck, etc. So it's good. It's like a super Shield Maiden, of course you'd play it. It just only happens to work in a Cthulhu deck, so if Cthulhu Warrior isn't a thing, this card won't see any play. Klaxxi Amber-Weaver is a 4/5 druid minion for 4 with a battle cry that gives it +5 health if your Cthulhu has at least 10 attack. This is, right now, the best 4-drop in Standard, no questions asked. You can play it on curve as a Chillwind Yeti on turn 4, and then in the late game, it's a guaranteed 4/10 for 4, which is an extra 2.5 mana worth of stats. And there's even a chance that you can play it as a 4/10 on turn 4 by coining out 2 Beckoners of Evil, or by innervating out a Twilight Elder on turn 1 and playing a Beckoner of Evil on turn 2. Eater of Secrets is a 2/4 for 4 with a battle cry that destroys all enemy secrets and then gains +1/+1 for each. This card unfortunately sucks. I want it to be good, I know everyone wants it to be good, but it sucks. Just like Kazan Mystic, you'll see it get played to counter Freeze Mage if Freeze Mage is still good in Standard, but versus Secret Paladin, on average this card is just going to be a 5/7 that blows up your opponent's secrets. It won't stop the Mysterious Challenger from hitting you in the face, and it won't clear the other 1 million minions your opponent already has on the board, so it can't be justified when it's god-awful in every single other matchup. Besides, Secret Paladin might end up dying when Standard hits anyways. Stand Against Darkness is a 5-mana paladin spell that summons 5 1/1 Silverhand recruits. So, here's the deal. If you have more than 2 minions on the board, this card sucks. Therefore, it's not playable in any sort of aggressive or mid-range deck. What about control? Well, think about this. There's a very limited amount of AoE in the game. At a certain point, your opponent is not going to be able to clear 5 1/1s, and all of their single target removal will be useless against 5 1/1s. And I think most people would agree that 5 1/1s is better than a single 5/5. And it just so happens that Control Paladin now has Forbidden Healing to back it up, and you probably aren't going to have more than 2 minions on the board at any given time in a control deck. So, I think it is somewhat reasonable to consider that maybe this card will actually be a good thing in a Paladin control deck somehow. Now, naturally, if there is any other 5-drop that is even half as good as Sludge Belcher that gets revealed, you're going to be playing that over this. But right now, Stand Against Darkness looks pretty good to me. The last card that got revealed was Cthulhu's Servant, a 4/2 for 4 with Divine Shield and a battlecry that gives your Cthulhu +2/+2. I am very conflicted about this card. On one hand, its a counterpart, Silver Moon Guardian, really sucks. On the other hand, 4/2 is a much better stat line than 3/3 on a minion with Divine Shield. Furthermore, it also buffs your Cthulhu, but how much do you really need to buff your Cthulhu for it to be good? And if this card ends up being subpar, is it still worth running in a Cthulhu deck at that point? Is it perhaps even worth running outside of a Cthulhu deck just because Piloted Shredder doesn't exist anymore? I really cannot effectively evaluate this card until we see more of this set. That's it for this week's video, guys, but don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I'll be back next week with another new video, but until then, you can check out Hearthhead.com or either of its social media pages for all sorts of Hearthstone-related content. See you next time, everybody.